For the call to worship this morning, I want to share with you one of my favorite poems by Liesl Mueller, and the poem is called Hope. Hope, it hovers in dark corners before the lights are turned on. It shakes sleep from its eyes and drops from mushroom gills. It explodes in the starry heads of dandelions turned sages. It sticks to the wings of green angels that sail from the tops of maples. It sprouts in each occluded eye of the many-eyed potato. It lives in each earthworm segment, surviving cruelty. It is the motion that runs from the eyes to the tail of a dog. It is the mouth that inflates the lungs of the child that has just been born. It is the singular gift we cannot destroy in ourselves, the argument that refutes death, the genius that invents the future, all we know of God. It is the serum which makes us swear not to betray one another. It is in this poem, trying to speak. And in that spirit, we worship together today. So part of the training to become a Unitarian Universalist minister involves clinical pastoral education, which is essentially learning how to be a chaplain. And I learned how to be a chaplain at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. I was with a group of other chaplain interns. There were 2 Orthodox Jews, a Reformed Jew, 2 Lutherans, 3 Episcopalians, a Catholic, and me. And our supervisor had us gather at the end of our shift, as the day was coming to a close, to check in and share with one another what our experiences had been. And he also wanted us to dig a little deeper and say, how did these experiences fit into our religious beliefs or our religious tradition? And the Episcopalian chaplains had the Book of Common Prayer. Their tradition provided the exact words to speak if someone is ill, or when someone is first born, or someone dies. And the Jewish chaplains also had prayers that they knew by heart, and they knew how to follow the ancient rituals at the appropriate moment. So when we talked about how our experiences with our patients fit into our religious tradition, my friends had succinct answers. They could say in one sentence what was at the core of their faith. They could use shorthand, and everyone essentially knew what they meant or what they were talking about when they said grace of God, salvation, bearing the cross. Or they could refer to entire stories, wisdom, teachings with one name: Jacob, Esther, Moses. And I stayed quiet for a few weeks during these conversations. I could feel what I believed, but I couldn't articulate it as concisely as my friends could. Unitarian Universalism, in my experience, doesn't have one specific set of words that can explain what it is that comforts and guides us as a religious people. I know that if we had a conversation about it right now, I would hear phrases and sentiments and words from all of you that match mine. We share a culture, a history, and the 7 principles. But that summer at Bellevue, I was serving the prison unit where Rikers Island inmates who are suffering physical or mental illness stay. And I served on the cardiac floor, in the emergency room, and on a closed psychiatric unit. And I very much wanted some exact words to say when someone confessed to a violent crime and asked for forgiveness, or didn't ask for forgiveness. I wanted exact words to say when someone was told that they would be entering hospice, or when someone was told that they would have to be more heavily medicated yet again because their mind had turned on them. And I wondered this whole time, what is at the core of my faith? So one day after a long shift, when we were sitting around the staff table talking, my friend Yosef asked me directly about how my faith was sustaining me during this experience. And I asked him to explain more what he meant. And he responded with something like this: what keeps you tethered when you are feeling sad or angry or utterly alone? What keeps you tethered when you speak to people who are in deep pain or dying? What keeps you tethered when you wake up in the morning and lie in bed absorbing the stories of people suffering all around the world? What keeps you tethered? So for my final sermon with you, I've decided to share what it is that keeps me tethered, because I feel you have a right to know as I leave here, since you are the ones who have taught me the lessons I need to go into my first ministry. And I'm going to draw from the wisdom of James Luther Adams, one of our beloved theologians, about what is at the core of our faith. I'm going to draw from him because he had the idea first. So James Luther Adams became a prominent theologian in the late 1930s. And around this time, our denomination was often criticized for allowing too much freedom of belief. And Adams was passionate about freedom of belief. In other words, there is no monopoly on truth in Unitarian Universalism. We're free to question, to constantly reshape what we believe as we grow. But Adams also took the criticisms of our freedom of belief seriously. As we heard in the reading, he said, "Not every form of freedom is permissible. Doctrinal tests are not in order. But if the community possesses no recognizable form and criterion, except that it offers absolute freedom, then it will be utterly undependable. It will degenerate into faithful and ethical neutrality." This gets at what my fellow chaplains were asking of me. What is at the core of your faith? Other than the fact that everyone is allowed to grow and to change what they believe as they go, what makes your faith dependable when you need it most? Adams knew that there cannot be a monopoly on truth. Freedom of belief and changing and growing as we learn from life and the stories of others is foundational to liberal religion. However, that doesn't mean that we have to avoid having shared religious convictions. Adams was very good at articulating what these shared religious convictions should be for Unitarian Universalists. And the way he put it, one of these convictions is that our faith holds that the resources, human and divine, which are available for the achievement of meaningful change, justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. As Laura talked about in the prayer, we were brutally reminded this week again of the difference between immediate and ultimate optimism. Michael Brown, a college-bound, unarmed black man, was shot dead in Ferguson, Missouri. And whether or not he was guilty of shoplifting, the fact remains, and part of the tragedy is, that when he left the house that day, he took more of a risk because of the color of his skin. Last week, we celebrated the work that this congregation has done to bring about racial justice in Northern Virginia. And I said that there is evidence that progress can be made if we continue to fight to uphold the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings. This congregation has lived the Unitarian Universalist belief that we have the spiritual resources we need to create positive change. The reality of the present can't cancel this out. The reality of the present reminds us of the gap between how the world is and how it ought to be. In the course of our lives, we discover that there is ample evidence to support an attitude of despair. And through the course of our life, we learn that there is ample evidence to sustain an attitude of hope. When we choose to live out of an attitude of hope, we are making a decision based on faith, not empirical evidence. Ultimate optimism is not a shallow and dismissive cheerfulness about life. It does not hide reality from us. Ultimate optimism means our belief that given the resources we have now in this life, we have cause for hope. It is this conviction that life is a comedy with moments of sorrow, rather than a tragedy with moments of joy. If you read our 7 principles, you will find that they are outrageously optimistic. But our principles are not statements of fact about the world we currently live in, about how we currently behave in this world. Our principles are what we believe is possible if we rely on the resources that are inherent in human nature, when we commune with something greater than ourselves: community, God, love. Our principles are statements of what we believe is possible. Our principles do not claim that everything is already as it should be. They are a statement of our ultimate optimism. Throughout history, Unitarian Universalists have been accused of being too optimistic about human nature and focusing too much on the goodness of this life rather than the afterlife. I think our optimism is often misinterpreted as cheerfully dismissive of suffering or the shadow side of life. The truth is that there are many Unitarian Universalists living with the pain of being abused, the pain of grieving the loss of a loved one, the pain from divorce or terminal illness. Being Unitarian Universalist doesn't mean that every day we will wake up brimming with happiness, ready and able to conquer anything. Being UU does not mean avoiding our pain and the pain of others so that we can be optimistic. It means facing down all the causes of suffering and believing that the resources in the human soul and the transformative power of love are cause for hope. When my chaplain friend Yosef asked me what was at the core of my faith, what was it that was keeping me tethered, I eventually answered ultimate optimism. It was something that I felt when I was sitting with people who were suffering. It didn't make logical sense all the time, but emotionally, I understood how resilient human beings are. The patients that I spoke with every day always had stories about loving someone else or being loved, even if it happened a long time ago. My ultimate optimism that human beings have the resources to create positive change was not something I could prove as fact. I could not prove to anyone that our ultimate optimism always leads to a better world. Does the joy of life outweigh its pain? Does justice always conquer injustice? Unitarian Universalism's answer to these questions is a statement of faith, not scientific fact. My chaplain colleagues' shorthand for the core of their faith could be summed up in exacting and concise phrases: grace of God, salvation. What their faith taught them could be alluded to with one name: Jacob, Esther, Moses. By the end of my chaplaincy, I carried 2 words in my heart when the suffering of my fellow human beings pierced me through. 2 words that were shorthand for the core of my faith: ultimate optimism. Over the past few weeks, when I've been preaching about the history of this congregation, you may have noticed that I see you all in a very positive light. And that's because I like you a lot. But it's also because I was so excited to discover that when I heard your stories and I read through those piles of meeting minutes from committee meetings and old newsletters, there was a very clear thread of ultimate optimism running through your actions and your history. While I was packing up my apartment this week, and I have to say I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so I was thinking, can I say this? But I'm going to say it because it's true. I have to tell you that after leaving my time with you in this large congregation where there is always something going on, I am leaving feeling energized and grounded and nourished. You have taught me that the resources of the human soul are unending. And you mean so much to me. Thank you for a transformative year, and thank you for helping me to learn yet again that there is cause for hope. Blessed be. Amen. Thank you.